lives of the last veterans of the First World War, Sir Andrew Motion reads his tribute to Harry Patch, a poem for Harry introduced by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales.
We mourn the passing of Harry Patch. Harry was the last of those remarkable men who, almost unimaginably, endured so much. The last survivor of the unutterable hell of the trenches. So today, nothing could give me greater pride than paying tribute. Harry was a plumber by trade, but like so many of his fellow countrymen, was conscripted into the army during the Great War. Harry joined the Duke of Cornwall's light infantry and served as a Lewis gunner. Tragically, one night in September 1917, when in the morass of the Ypres salient, a German shrapnel shell burst overhead, badly wounding Harry and killing 3 of his closest friends. It is of the greatest importance that the stories of Harry and the fine soldiers he served alongside live on as a legacy to ensure we never forget.
In the 9 years that I've been Poet Laureate, I've had some remarkable opportunities, but none quite like the chance to write about Harry Patch. It is, by some distance, the most interesting of these sort of commissions that I've had. Yeah, it's daunting. It's daunting because it's a big challenge. It's daunting because I want to pay him the respect that he deserves.
Charlie Murray, Stanley Pierce, Harold Chivers, I knew them all.
It's so enormous, the First World War as a subject. It's so awful. Who am I to feel that I can say anything about it which is telling, new, different, surprising, adequate, that hasn't already been said already? We have the great poems written during the First World War. I can't help but be anything but a Johnny-come-lately to this.
O valiant hearts, who to their glory came through the dust and noise of battle, the battle flame. No.
Because of the not much short of reverential feelings that I have about him because of what he went through and how magnificently he's endured and survived, I feel that it really quite a heavy burden on me to pay him due respect, to celebrate him and honour him as he deserves to be celebrated and honoured, but at the same time not to let those feelings of something approaching awe get in the way of having a normal, friendly conversation. Harry lives in a care home in Wells. Over the last few years, he's gradually become something of a celebrity.
Probably later on we'll get a pile of mail for him. We get emails come in a daily basis. And they can be from Germany, all over the world. People wanting just to wish him best of luck, really.
Harry's close friend Nick Fear visits regularly to help him deal with all his correspondence.
There's the entry you put. As far as I'm concerned, television's just entertainment.
As well as responding to his mail, Harry writes a regular advice column in a men's magazine.
Is that all right? There's a bit of light reading for you.
Harry's independent. He makes his own decisions about all parts of his life. You know, when he gets up in the morning, when he goes to bed, he makes his own decisions of which appointments he's going to attend and which ones he's not going to attend, because he gets lots of invites out.
Harry has kindly set aside some time to spend with me as I research ideas for the poem. His biography is full of detail that could help. But today is about seeing and hearing Harry's story for myself. It's incredibly moving to think that I'm about to shake the hand of the last man who was in the trenches. Nothing topples that extraordinary fact that, by luck, he is the last survivor from this time. And once he's no longer with us, that removes what history absolutely depends on to be at its most compelling, which is a first-hand account. Getting to feel his force is important. I want to feel the pulse of his personality. I want to see how his mind moves between memories of the war and memories of the other parts of his life. I want to feel his age, which is phenomenal.
Dumb.
And I feel old enough, but I'm only a tiny bit over half his age.
Hello. How wonderful to see you. How wonderful to see you. How are you?
Not too bad.
Good. Thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you.
I'm a bit deaf.
I'm a bit deaf too, so between us we're not going to do very well.
That's two of us.
Yes. I wanted to ask you some things about your medals. Tell me about your medals.
Well, that is the French Legion of Honor. That's the highest French medal. I was a Lewis gunner.
Yes. But you tell a very moving story in the book about how you would only shoot
We never
people in the knees.
fire to kill.
Yes.
Always low. Get them in the leg.
This is it's clearly an enormously important thing that happened to you there. And in a sense, it's why a lot of people come and talk to you today. But it's 4 months out of, how old are you now, 109? It's a tiny percentage, isn't it, of your life story. But do you feel it's the thing which gives it its definite shape? Is it the thing you think about more than anything else? He was very, very quiet a lot of the time, almost stonily quiet to start with. Sometimes I think just because he'd rather sort of lost his way in where he was thinking. But much more significantly because periodically he came up against the raw facts of very painful things, and he was moved to silence. In fact, Harry barely spoke about the war to anyone for most of his life. His memories of the trenches only began to surface when he was 100 years old. They were sometimes triggered by a flickering light in a linen cupboard opposite his room. The care staff covered the window above his bedroom door to try and stop the flashbacks.
Sometimes I wake up, and if I do, I'm on that damned battlefield. And maybe the younger generation doesn't realize what it was like.
But do you feel that that puts a kind of burden on you to tell them?
I know when we went over the top, I fell into the trench. I found one fella ripped, head from shoulder to waist, shrapnel
and he was still alive?
He died. I held his hand for the last 30 seconds of his life.
To see him being so moved, and actually I thought probably over the years increasingly moved and distressed by his memories, was itself deeply moving. That was my overwhelming sense of it. It was an extremely moving encounter. What I'm particularly interested in doing is finding a way of showing how the war, which only takes up 4 months in terms of sort of lived life, of all the 1,000 and some that he's lived, nevertheless seems to colour, inform, undermine, affect everything that he's ever done. So how am I going to strike that balance between talking about the war itself and the rest of his life, which clearly, if I'm going to write about him, as it were, properly, I must get into the picture as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. Harry lives in a delightful home in Wales, and the people there really care for him, but he does like to get out and about. So when he feels like a day out, I will go down and we get in the car and drive off to his old haunts of Coombe Down, where he grew up, and just remember the old times. A lot of Harry's life's very good, but I think his early part of his life is particularly memorable for him.
Harry was born in 1898 in Coombe Down near Bath. He lived with his family in the house his father, a stonemason, had built himself.
You went through the gate, and then there was an apricot, a pear tree, a peach tree.
One of Harry's earliest memories is of eating pears in his parents' garden. His father had forbidden him to pick the fruit, so a mischievous young Harry took mouthfuls from the back of the pears while they were still hanging on the tree.
Big pear, about £1/2 each. I had a bloody good wallop.
And as he describes this attempt to steal or nibble the fruit, he remembers himself being on all fours, crawling along a row of potatoes. And it's completely impossible not to read that account that he gives in the very early stages of his book without thinking that it's in some way like being in the trenches. I mean, he's crawling through mud.
Beneath the village of Coombe Down is an old network of stone mines where, as a child, Harry often played. These days, the honeycomb of underground tunnels is being filled in. But 100 years ago, you would have seen a 9-year-old boy and his friends creeping into them, throwing stones at the wasps' nests, and then tearing out again as quickly as they could.
And that too seemed to me a story which had parallels, which echoed certain sort of wartime experiences, being in a dangerous situation, taking risks, getting stung, all those kinds of things.
Harry's mischief wasn't limited to the stone quarries. He clearly remembers getting into trouble with his geometry master at school.
Didn't he ask you something about a circle?
A curve. I said, a curve is a straight line called bending. I got a rap.
After leaving school in 1912, Harry began to work as an apprentice plumber. But like hundreds of thousands of young men, his career was interrupted by the Great War.
I've been interested in poetry about the First World War ever since I started reading and writing poems, really, which was when I was a teenager, Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon. whose suitcase you can see just under my desk, which I'm now the proud owner. The idea is that the spirit of the First World War would rise up through the soles of my feet while I was writing about Harry Patch.
As I search for a structure for the new poem, it's not the suitcase that inspires me, but the name, Harry Patch. It sounds like a character from a Shakespearean battle scene.
As soon as I'd got that in my head, I started to think, right, well, this is a sort of play. It's a 5-act play. And around that time I started to think, therefore, that this poem should be called The 5 Acts of Harry Patch, as though his life was indeed a drama, which, of course, it is in all kinds of ways. And what that will allow to happen is for a series of linked poems to cover the whole extent of his extraordinary life, but at the same time to have the war running through and beneath absolutely everything. And then I want to write a poem about him being involved in hanging the bell at the top of the Wills Tower in Bristol, because something else happens there which sort of remembers the war.
When I went there, it was almost complete, and the bell arrived. Great George.
Did you ever sound it?
The foreman had a notice printed. Nobody must ring the bell. Everybody with a spanner, a mallet, or what they had would ring the bloody bell. If they couldn't ring it, they'd kick it.
It was as Harry worked on the roof, close to the enormous bell, that he had another remarkable escape from danger, when a thunderstorm struck.
There was a flash of light. It hit the bell, Wentworth.
What did it feel like?
You could smell sulfur in the air.
The tower was finished in 1925, and Harry attended the official opening by the King and Queen. "83 years on, a restoration of the Wills Memorial Building has just been completed, and Harry returned as guest of honour at the switch-on of the new floodlights.
Look at that, Harry. It's magnificent, isn't it?
Yeah, there are the 10 gods.
Yeah.
They're all covered in lead at the back.
Are they? Harry, did you put the lead on them?
I helped.
Harry Patch is, by strange chance, the most extraordinary multiple survivor. By the start of World War II, Harry was 41 and served not as a soldier, but with the fire service back in Coombe Down. This is him in the middle, with a moustache. Even on the home front, Harry cheated death. At the end of a long night fighting fire in Bath, the crew discovered their fire engine had been parked over an unexploded German bomb.
I think I'm nearly there now. I knew right from the beginning that the very end of it was going to be the most difficult one to write, because I know that there's going to be a rather temptation to make a big ending, which I'd quite like to resist. Auden famously said, quoting Verlaine, I think, "A poem is never finished, it's only abandoned," and that seems right to me.
Harry was married to his wartime sweetheart Ada for 57 years, but she died in 1976. In the coming years, Harry was also to lose his 2 sons, his second wife, and 2 close companions at the home where he now lives. It gradually became clear that Harry Patch was outliving his entire generation. It's time for Harry to hear the poem. The Bishop's Palace in Wells has been chosen for my first public recital. An audience of dignitaries, friends, and of course, Harry himself has been invited.
Really, this is about him, as far as I'm concerned. It's about how he feels that he's been represented in this thing. I want him to like it, I suppose. I want him to feel spoken to and for by it.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think for Harry to have a poem that's going to portray that his life is going to be wonderful.
He will smile a lot, he'll be really pleased, but I'm not sure he'll say an awful lot today, but I think deep down he'll be chuffed as anything.
He may have nothing to say about it, and I will be able to understand that if he doesn't want to say anything now, I must say, because, as we were just saying a minute ago, I mean, it is potentially embarrassing and difficult to respond to something straight off, particularly if you don't live in a world where poetry is a sort of regular feature, as it isn't for him. But I hope he'll feel spoken to by it. I understand that his highest term of praise is okay, so I'm rather listening for the okay. A bit of getting psyched up is not a bad thing, I think. In this particular case, which is not like other cases, there is, of course, something else going on, which is that I'm going to be sitting next to the subject of the poem himself and reading it, in some sense, first and foremost to him. So that does add a special element of anxiety to the proceedings. A curve is a straight line caught bending, and this one runs under the kitchen window where the bright eyes of your mum and dad might flash any minute and find you down on all fours, stomach hard to the ground, slinking along a furrow between the potatoes and dead set on a prospect of rich pickings, the good apple trees and plum trees and pears, anything sweet and juicy you might now be able to nibble around the back and leave hanging as though nothing were amiss, if only it were possible to stand upright in so much clear light, and with those eyes beady in the window, and not catch a packet. Patch, Harry Patch, that's a good name, Shakespearean. It might be one of Howell's men at Agincourt, or not far off, although in fact it starts life and belongs in Coombe Down, with your dad's trade in the Canary limestone, which turns to grey and hardens when it meets the light, perfect for Regency Bath, and you too, since no one these days thinks about the danger of playing in quarries when the workmen go, not even of prodding and pelting with stones the wasps' nests perched on rough ledges, or dropped from the ceiling on curious stalks, although God knows it means having to shift toot sweet and still get stung on arms and faces. First, the hard facts of not wanting to fight, and the kindness of deciding to shoot men in the legs but no higher, unless needs must, and the liking among comrades which is truly deep and wide as love, without that particular name. Then Pilcombe Ridge and Langemarck and across the Steenbeek, since none of the above can change what comes next, which is a lad from A Company, shrapnel has ripped open from shoulder to waist, who tells you, shoot me, but is good as dead already, and whose final word is, mother, which you hear because you kneel to hold one finger of his hand, and then remember orders to keep pressing on, support the infantry ahead. After the big crowd to unveil the memorial, and no puff left in the lungs to sing, "Oh, valiant hearts," or say aloud the names of friends and one cousin, the butcher and chimney sweep, a farmer, a carpenter. Work comes up the Wills Tower in Bristol, and there thunderstorms are a danger, so bad that lightning one day hammers Great George and knocks down the foreman, who can't use his hand 3 weeks later, as you recall, along with the way that strike burned all trace of oxygen from the air. It must have, given the definite stink of sulfur, and a second or two later, the gusty flap of a breeze returning, along with rooftops below, and moss, and rain, fading over the green Mendip Hills and blue Severn. You grow a moustache, check the mirror, notice you're 40 years old, Then next day, shave it off. Check the mirror again and see you're 70. But life is like that now. Suddenly and gradually, everyone you know dies and still comes to visit, or you head back to them. It's not clear which. Only where it happens, a safe bedroom upstairs by the look of things. Although when you sit late, whispering with the other boys in the Lewis team, smoking your pipe upside down to hide the fire, and the nurses on night duty bring folded sheets to store in the linen cupboard opposite. All it takes is someone switching on the light. There is that flash, or was until you said, and the staff blacked the window. Well, that applause is all for you, you realise that?
Yeah. It's a great honor to have a poem written for me by you. That's all I can say.
Well, it's a great honour for me to be able to have the chance to do it, and that's not quite all I can say, but it's all I will say. So, thank you. I was very touched by people's response to the poem, which of course is really their response to him as well. But I did get the sense from the look of him that, insofar as I could see him, that he was connecting with the poem. So I was particularly pleased about that. But I felt the warmth in the room was really moving, actually. I was very touched by the whole thing. I had expected to be, but it was better than what I'd thought. And so that was all very, very good. I was delighted.
Wasn't that super?
Not too bad.
I thought for Harry, what the nicest part of the poem was, there was only a tiny bit in the middle that actually was about the war. It was about his whole life, not just concentrating on the war, because we tried to protect him, because he gets quite emotional about the war. So it was lovely that it was about his whole life.
I thought it was pretty special. Andrew Motion's, you can see why he's the Poet Laureate. Tremendous.
I was absolutely stunned by it. I can't say really any more than that, other than the fact I thought it was fantastic, beautifully written. Especially the third act, when he talks about the young Cornishman who's ripped from his chest to his navel. I think that really struck home with people, and again the way that he constructed that into that particular act was so moving. And you could see as well, I thought, Harry at that moment, you saw him going back again 90 years to somewhere he doesn't usually like going back to, but just at that moment I think he was back there, and it was terribly moving, really moving.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed your day.
I hope you have.
I very much have.
I have.
Well, I'm going to come down to Wales again during the summer, so I'll hope to see you then.
Yes, do.
Thank you. I'd love to do that. Will you look after yourself? All right?